Hello. It's been a minute since I posted a writing vlog update, so here is one to go with the second part of the short story that I published, which is below this Patreon post if you're watching this on Patreon, or linked to below if you're watching this on YouTube, or probably linked to if you're... Basically, there's going to be... Just look around, there's a link to it very, very nearby. And this update comes in 3 parts. The first part is the writing vlog update about an ongoing piece of work that I've been doing now for, or I've returned to and have been doing for several months, that I originally started a long time ago, and the process behind that. The second part touches on the story I've written that I'm linking to, some of the process behind that, and how the two are sort of a bit tied together in a way. And the third part is a bit more about the story that includes spoilers. So if you haven't read it yet, I'm leaving that stuff to last so that you have a chance to go away. And if you want, read it, and then you can come back and watch this and go, oh, right, that's what you were thinking. Or, oh, no, it's up to you. It's your decision. Yeah, it's been a minute. So first of all, what's been happening? The pandemic continues to be sort of the worst possible context, worst possible situation to be a creative person in. It's not easy doing a lot of written work, especially, I don't know if spec work is the name for it, but my own projects versus things that other people have asked me to do, or sort of ongoing regular stuff. But it has improved a bit since last time. And I mentioned before about just trying to push through things rather than give myself a break. And I think that was the right idea. I think the right idea was to maybe sometimes jump tracks and work on other things, but to keep pushing, to keep trying, and to keep at the work that I'm doing. What is happening now with this increasingly large piece of work that I'm writing is, I think it has to be split up into, it has to be pitched to whoever I'm going to pitch it to as a multi-part thing, and split up into sections, which is a different kind of challenge because thematically I will need those different sections to stand alone a little more. But I don't think, I think it would be too much to ask somebody to sit down and read all of it as one piece, sorry, and to ask anyone to publish it as one piece as well. I don't see that as being a practical pitch. And it's not that that would be unprecedented for some web publishing or some physical publishing. Like, it's not as if people don't sit down and read really, really big work sometimes, but I don't think that is the practical thing to do. I continue to make progress. I continue to add to it. I continue to change it. One of the things that has become apparent to me is some of the language needs to be... I'm getting a lot of the beats down right now, and then later I need to make it, I don't know, more poetic. Does that make sense? But that, to me, isn't all of what this writing stage is right now. It's just including, I guess, all the main material. And then working out if things flow in an order that I'm happy with, because it won't be sort of entirely linear. It will jump back and forth a bit, but I still have to work out how I want to do that, and then later polishing the language, I think, comes last. And I'm in really stage 2 of this now as I continue to add things in, and I have a pretty good idea now, I think, of structure and material content, but we'll see. This is ongoing, and like every week I'm writing this or changing this or doing this with something. So this is unlike any sort of other piece of writing I've done for a long time, except maybe the going home thing that I did on my Patreon a couple of years ago, which ended up as a 4-part thing of, I don't know, what was that, 30,000 something words? Maybe it was more. I don't know. That was a lot. If you can hear a buzz, I'm sorry, my fridge just switched on, and that's what it does. Or like a horrible high-pitched whine. That's the update with that. The similarity between that and the second part of the short story that I've just published is both of them, I'm letting them lead me in where they go. And what I mean by that is when I started this short story that I started in December, and originally I was like, this will be a kind of spooky-ish December story. My original intention wasn't for it to be as big as it's become. And some of the things in it have remained the same, some of the things have changed. But what I had to do was not have a particular plan for this anyway. I had to sort of let it evolve and see where it took me. You know, once I had some things happening in this, I knew there were certain elements I wanted to include, but I didn't know exactly how it would end. And I didn't know exactly what would lead to that ending, if that makes any sense. And I feel like this is what's happening with this longer piece of work that I've been working on as well. It's something where it's changed as I've worked on it, and I have to accept that. Sometimes when I do pieces of written work, I know exactly what I want to say and what the structure is. And I've heard this often from people who paint or people who draw and other people who write, is sometimes when you're working on something, you don't know all of the specifics of it or all of the details, or you don't even know how the finished piece is going to look. And this is the case for me right now with the story I just published and with this larger piece of work. I actually, even though I have a vision, I'm actually throwing things together and, I don't know, seeing what sticks. This story, I didn't originally envision it being 2 parts. And I didn't think it would be like it's come out, I don't know, 4,000 words. I didn't think it would be that big. But things just kept happening and I kept thinking to myself, no, I want to include this or I want to change that. And I think it was better to follow that process. Does that make sense? That might make sense to some folks out there. I definitely know some artists and writers who have had that sort of thing happen with them as they've worked on things. If that happens to be your experience of creating something, I think that is not unusual. I think that's valid. I think that's cool. I think that's interesting. And I think it tells us not to be too precious about something that we're making, that we can not be too rigid. So here's part 3. Or just leading into part 3. Another part of this process of writing this short story was something that's come up a lot for me as a writer over the years who's done lots of journalism and sort of, I don't know, factual or personal or non-fiction or whatever you would call it work, is research. A lot of the process of writing for me, and this has happened with some other short fiction I've done as well, is research. That if I'm trying to set something in a place, or in a time or with certain ideas, I can find it really jarring reading something else if a detail comes out that to me is very obviously wrong, not correct. And I don't want to be that person. So where possible, I try to, if I can't be like extremely technically accurate or precise, I try to get things sort of roughly correct, or have things both have a kind of internal consistency, but at least I hope sort of a casual observer or someone with some amount of knowledge would look at that and go, that makes sense, or that feels correct. That was also part of the process of writing this story. And funnily enough, that is part of my larger piece that I'm working on. But yeah, I don't know, the quick sort of cliff notes, spark notes, summary notes of part 2 of the Barbican story is, yeah, this is definitely the spoiler bit. This is your last chance. I always knew I wanted something to be supernatural in there, and I always knew I wanted it to be about emptiness and strangeness and a sense of things being wrong or dead or colourless, because this was my experience of visiting the Barbican when I used to live near it in the time that this story is set, in 2006. That 1/3 of the apartments at that time in the Barbican were apparently not occupied. It was very empty. And I would visit there and I would find it very empty. And I think some of the places that were occupied were also rented out to people who perhaps worked in the city and then went home, wherever home was, at the weekend. So it was maybe even less than 1/3 occupied at the weekend. And this story reflects a lot of my experiences walking around the Barbican when I lived near there, which is this bizarre estate made of brutalist angles and corners or perfect circles, which are also weirdly overly scientific and dispassionate, I thought. It's very, very grey, very lifeless. It has a lot of strange corridors and things around corners and hallways and steps to places, and some of it is only for residents and some of it isn't. And you have, these lakes that are actually, a foot deep or a foot and a half deep, and sometimes less than some. Like, they're not really lakes at all. They're incredibly shallow. And you have this sort of failed experiment where it does have this unique sort of, I guess, modernist kind of brutalist style that looks cool, but it also dates itself immediately to the 60s, even though the last bits of it, I think, were finished in the 80s, where it doesn't have enough power supply units. And it had, I think, some of the first, like, waste disposal, put it down the sink, waste disposal type things that Britain had at the time, which are common in North America. Trash compactor, not trash, but, those things, put it down the sink. And they would smell terrible, which is a detail that I tried to put in there. Same for sometimes other people control the heating in your flat. You're not in charge of it yourself, which is a weird detail. I wanted to get lots of elements of the weirdness of the Barbican across, and then, I don't know, combine that with the idea of that it's not entirely worldly, or it crosses our world and another world, because it was bombed to hell in World War II and completely rebuilt. And so it's this strange place between realms where maybe you could run into a psychopomp, which is a word for someone who takes you away to the underworld when you die. And like a few things I write, I didn't want to get into detail, but I didn't want it to be an entirely straight story, as in entirely, I wanted hints of queerness in there. And I don't know at what point, I don't know where on the spectrum you have to put the needle for it to be too obvious or too understated, so I don't know how that went. Yeah, I don't know, that's the summary of that. If you want to ask me more about that, please do. Please drop a comment or just talk to me about it in the Discord or something if you're in there. But I've been talking now for 13 minutes, so I should stop this and put it on YouTube and say, thanks for reading this. If you've subscribed on Patreon, thanks very much. If you've just read it anyway, thanks very much. If you've shared it, thanks very much. If you've enjoyed it, thanks very much. If you've got any criticisms or feedback, thanks very much. Just basically, thanks. And I hope you have a good day or evening or night or week or month. In fact, I just hope it's all good. Just have a good time. Thanks.